All right, FACEIT fans, it's time for another catch-up, and this time North America. Now, North America didn't have as many headline games as EMEA did this week. Luminosity even scheduled a lot of their games out of this week, so it was a bit of a quieter week in North America, but we did still get some really interesting action in the middle of the pack, and the big winners out of everyone, pre their appearance at the Dallas Major, students of the game. So, let's take a look at all of the games that happened, try and catch you up on some of them, and see how some of these teams, especially the Dallas Hopefuls, are doing as we move into Dallas. We'll start with one of our Dallas Hopefuls, M80, and they took on Smartfellas, and it was a complete mismatch. It was very much a classic North America game, where the first map was a roll, and then the second map, people started off rolling, and it got a little bit competitive, but really, no sweat for M80. An easy win pre-Dallas. Then we get one of quite a few bottom-of-the-table clashes, where we get Gilberts NTMR against Avidity. Now, this was a back-and-forth series. The full hold on Iconworld, I think, really helped Avidity turn it around. I think when we look through the scoreboard, we can see Nenwai and Eve having single-death Junkertowns, and really, once the series swung in Avidity's favour, it swung quite hard in their favour, and we're able to get an important win in a bottom-of-the-table clash. Then we get Citrus Nation versus Dreamland, and this is one of the more interesting games because Citrus Nation are once again without Lethal, so Zombo was stepping in, and actually Dreamland won this one. Dreamland have been a team skirting around that sort of battle for the top 8. They've also recently rebranded to Fluffy Aimers, which you maybe will have seen them tagged up as more recently. But this was a really important win for Dreamland. And I think it goes to show just how important a part of Citrus Nation Lethal is. I think maybe you can point a few flaws of the fact that Paricio was allowed through. It really felt like Citrus Nation had no clue what to play on that map or any answer to any sort of dive composition. So not banning that map maybe really came back to bite them. And Dreamland with a pretty impressive performance. Again, Astro looked pretty good throughout all of this. Manually did the normal manually things and clicked on some stuff. So a really great win for Dreamland, now Fluffy Aimers. Then we get Shikigami versus Toronto, and Shikigami actually had a pretty good week overall, but wasn't a good start, maybe as you'd expect against Toronto. Much like a lot of these games, it was a roll in map 1, and then on Midtown, Sugar Free got on main tanker, and it got a little bit more competitive, but ultimately, as you'd expect, Toronto stay winning. Similarly here, we get another mismatch, TSM against Valentine. Not too many problems for TSM, and they keep up their pretty positive record, even despite their loss against Students of the Game last week. So a straightforward one for TSM right here. Then we get Toronto Defiant taking on another one of the top 8 contenders in Citrus Nation, and it was a mismatch again. Citrus Nation again without Lethal, which maybe really is their talisman hit scan player. Without him, they really don't look the same team. And honestly, since the Orisa patch became a thing of the past, they've also really not looked the same team. Again, on Iconworld here, we see some off-rolling. So if you want to see some Someone Farah, some Someone Echo, a bit of Vega on Cass, dropped 50 limbs he did on Iconworld. Really impressive off-rolling from Toronto. Merritt played some Winston. That was maybe the least impressive part of it. But Toronto Defiant, they can even off-roll against Citrus Nation, if you can believe it. This series between Students of the Game and UNC Inc. was actually a bit of a close series. And generally speaking, when Students of the Game have a close series against a team you don't expect to have a close series against, the word trolling comes to mind. But they managed to get it together, they get it over the line, everyone would expect them to beat this team, and they start off what will turn out to be a very good week for Students of the Game with this win over UNC Inc. Another heated bottom-of-the-table clash between Smartfellas and Gilberts NTMR. And this was a really close one. You see, Iconworld went to overtime. It was Mooma maybe putting up the most impressive numbers across both maps, but Gilberts NTMR making this important win, and really that battle at the bottom of the standings in North America does seem a little bit anyone can beat anyone, but Gilberts NTMR get the victory here. Their first game with their new brand, Fluffy Aimers, was against Toronto Defiant, and as you imagine, they lost, but it was a pretty competitive first map, and maybe the sort of silver lining here is Fluffy Aimers played them close enough in map 1. Toronto stayed on their rolls for map 2, so a little bit of a sign of respect there from Toronto Defiant for Fluffy Aimers, taking them seriously enough to play their roles at least, but as we always say, Toronto Defiant on top. This was quite similar in many ways. A competitive map 1 actually kept M80 on their main roles going into map 2, so UNC Inc. trying to getting that badge of honor as well, but still ultimately not close enough to really trouble or worry M80 all too much. And M80 had a pretty easy week as far as all these fixtures go, and they rack up another win here. Valentine then took on Pip, and Pip had some struggles last week, but they get a win over a lower tier of opposition here, even get the full hold on Midtown, so a very dominant win for Pip here. It was worth noting as well, Rhino actually played in these maps instead of Strider, so good for Rhino to come in, put in a dominant performance over a team you'd expect him to beat, and Pip back to winning ways. Now, this was one of the more important games of the week, Green Fortnite versus Shikigami, both part of that pack chasing that 8th place or top 8 spots. And it was a back and forth series. Ultimately, Shikigami come out on top. A really important win for Shikigami. And despite that earlier loss to Toronto, and this was the start of a very good week for Shikigami that puts them in a pretty good position to get top 8 when we look at the standings later. For Green Fortnite, they were in pretty good form. They lose this one and it's going to hurt. But as you can see, it was mighty competitive. So not all is lost for Green Fortnite by any means. And we'll see how they do going forward. Toronto Defiant then take on Avidity, and you know the spiel. They win, they do the thing. Avidity actually even forfeited this loss, so this was actually technically the easiest of the wins for Toronto. They didn't have to do anything more than turn up, but they keep winning pre-Dallas. Similarly, Avidity struggled against Citrus Nation, so again, still without Lethal, but enough firepower to take care of Avidity, and Citrus Nation get a crucial win as what has been a really rocky campaign so far, mainly due to their roster issues, but despite still having to play without Lethal, they get the win here, and at this stage, as we get into the latter part of FACEIT, all these wins are crucial, even if they're just against the weaker teams. You have to nail all these games, you can't afford to slip up, because it's getting super tight for that top 8. Then we get one of the best series of week. I think if you're going to go watch any game, this game is probably the game to go and watch. We saw Students of the Game take on FMCL. They started on Nepal, and actually, it was Amalgam Mirror, and FMCL really seemed to have the edge in terms of the macro and ult understanding. Students of the Game were running a bit of Pharah Tracer, and it really wasn't working against the Pharah Sojourn from FMCL. So FMCL took a pretty commanding lead and felt like they had the advantage in the meta there. And then when we go over to Midtown, we get a little bit more variety in some of the comps, but ultimately we end up on more of the same. And honestly, FMCL looked the better team for the most part on this map, but then a mismanaged overtime situation from FMCL on their defense denied them the opportunity to get the second fight they were hoping for, and that they probably had the ults to win. So a bit of a blunder there from FMCL. Allows it to go to a map 3, and then we get, again, more of the Amalgam Mirror, but this time suddenly everything starts to feel a little bit more Students of the Game favoured. They're winning more of the ult fights. They're setting up a lot of clean situations where they just have ult advantage, and that's really hard for FMCL to deal with. Important kites, I think, coming out from Students of the Game to set up those situations. And overall, Students of the Game got more impressive further this series went on and claimed a very big win, really, in terms of this sort of battle behind Toronto and M80. Citrus Nation again, and we're going to say the same thing we usually do. Roster issues. Zumba had to play, Renaissance had to play, so they had a really tight game against Smartfellas, even dropping map 1. But at this point, I think with all the issues Citrus Nation have had, they'll just be happy to get a win on the board, even if it was a close series against a team they probably, if we're being honest, shouldn't go close with. They'll just be happy to get the win. An important one for them. Every game important for all this top 8 hopeful pack. And they get it here, they get it over line. Citrus Nation stabilize a little bit, but they're still gagging. They're still gagging to get their full roster back, honestly. And then we get to the next important Shikigami victory, again over one of the other top 8 hopefuls. They have a comeback victory. They lose for Nepal, but then Doomed, who's recently come into the roster, put up really big numbers on Holly and Route 66, really helped turn the series around for Shikigami. They claim another important win, and even though I think they go 2-1 ultimately this week, it's actually a really important 2-1 when you look at where those 2 victories came. So Shikigami definitely trending up and put themselves in a pretty decent position to secure that top 8. We have another bottom of the table clash here where UNC Inc take on Gilberts Nightmare. Now, UNC Inc win this one, actually pretty convincingly. Paintbrush has a 1-death Nepal, and then on Iconwald, Haven actually put some pretty big numbers up to help them through that one. So a good win for UNC Inc, and they find themselves towards the top of that sort of bottom group after this one. This next game was a real chance for FMCL to prove how close they are to that that top 2 in North America. How close can they play to Toronto? How close can they play to M80? They played M80 in this one, and it was competitive. Happy put up big numbers throughout, and while Hawk had a lot of deaths in map 1, we see actually a lot of that shifted onto Seeker in map 2, so it felt like they were able to play a bit more front to back in Nepal, and FMCL had some success there, but then on Midtown it felt like M80 found a way to get to FMCL's main man Seeker, take him out of the game, and while competitive, M80 come out on top, keep themselves winning going into Dallas. Then we get Students of the Game's next big win over TSM. Again, they lose control. Students of the Game can't seem to catch a break on control. They always lose it, but it also never seems to be a problem for them. They're always good for the comeback victory. And on Paricio, we move on to a dive mirror. It was very competitive. Ultimately, in overtime, a clutch Primal 9 from Infected to force everyone off point is what sealed it. Force it over to that map 3, and then once we got to map 3, again, we see an increasingly familiar Malga mirror coming out of North America, and this time, Students of the Game were leaning to Soj and Farah, and it worked really well for them. Rocket was on the Genji, but was struggling to find the same value as Scissors was, and ultimately, a lot of the things that went right from the FMCL series also were what went right ultimately on Route 66 here for Students of the Game. So a really good win, concluding a very good week. And honestly, Students of the Game couldn't have asked for a better week in terms of results, and even, to a degree, performances, going into their first big event at the Dallas Major this weekend. Then we get Green Fortnite returning to winning ways. They beat Valentine, which is a team they'd expect them to beat. Again, Bubblegum, X10, the usual crew putting up the big numbers to help them over the line with this one. And important to, as we've said before, important to convert these results when you're in that top 8 chasing pack. It didn't last too long though, because then Green Fortnite took on Pip and they lost another very close game. So 2 close losses for Green Fortnite here against teams that are there vying for top 8 with. So a tough week for Green Fortnite. Really, this series could have gone either way. You look at that Shambali and overtime victory for Pip. Anything could have happened in this series, maybe to turn it one way or the other. It was worth noting that Strider was back for this series as well, and it seems like Pip certainly needed him because he also put up really big numbers for the team, and I'm sure was a crucial part of why they were actually able to win this series, and ends up being a very good week for Pip to make up for their poor week the week prior. So Green Fortnite's hot streak maybe seems to have come to an end, but they're still in the running, and it's going to get really interesting these last few weeks between all those teams vying for top 8. So, we can take a look at the table, and no one will be surprised that if you are a Toronto Defiant fan, you have played 11 games, you have won 11 games, you find yourself on top of the table. Then we get a little bit of a gap between we have our teams on 9 wins, which is Students of the Game after their very good week. TSM still up there despite that loss to Students of the Game, and M80 up there as well. Now, Students of the Game do have one more loss, so they played a game more. So there is a chance for TSM and M80 to shift themselves back above that. But these teams have really cemented themselves as the top 4. And there is a real chance Luminosity, because they have 2 games in hand, can get themselves up to 8 and look a little bit closer to this overall. But Luminosity have a lot of catching up to do, but they do have the games to do it. Meanwhile, once we get to this chasing pack, remember, top 8 is the important thing. So we have these 4 teams locked in, and then these teams joint on 6 wins. Those are all the spots right now. Currently, right now, Niz is the top 8, but you can see Green Fortnite and Citrus Nation are right behind them. You probably expect teams like FMCL and Luminosity to drift up the table, but then that only leaves 2 spots for the likes of Shikigami, Pip, Green Fortnite, and Citrus Nation. Now, Citrus Nation, we've talked about all their roster issues to death, and while it is a huge problem, the important thing for Citrus Nation is they're actually still in the running. So if they're able to find a little bit more luck with getting their players in the lobby, they can really shoot up this table and secure themselves in that top 8 spot. As really going into this, I think everyone would have predicted Citrus Nation to get top 8. So the fact that it's even a little bit in contention is a big problem, but a solvable problem for Citrus Nation. They still have the games to do it. Meanwhile, the other teams, we saw a good week from Shikigami, a good win from Pip over Green Fortnite. Green Fortnite losing a couple of these crucial games. If they'd won both of those games, they'd actually be on 7 wins and in a really great position. So tough losses for Green Fortnite, but it's really fair to say that all these teams at this stage are still in it. Fluffy Aimers have the outside chance, but they have some catching up to do. It's not impossible they steal a top 8 spot, but still a lot to be done. Then we get a sort of chasing pack below that. which are really just the bottom of the table clashes. We can see a few teams just on one win. Poor smart fellas, stuck on a winless situation. Valentine have put a bit of distance between them and the others, but all those bottom of the table clashes still interesting because nobody wants to finish bottom and nobody wants to get relegated. So still some more action to happen there. But I think certainly for me, the interest in North America is these 6 teams and who makes top 8. And we'll get to see a lot of that next week. We'll get to see a lot of it with Luminosity catching up some of their games. So it'll be definitely worth paying attention to. We can take a look then at the schedule coming up. So obviously we have to bear in mind, while Luminosity might catch up on some of their games, we're going to have Toronto and M80 playing a lot less next week as they will be in Dallas focusing on that, as you can imagine. So stay tuned for all the action. There will be a lot to come. I think like particular games that will be of highlight is obviously this M80 TSM one, though we don't know exactly where it will be played. Same with Students of the Game and Pip. A very interesting game there. On the other side of it, Pip versus M80 could be interesting. Again, there's a bit of a caveat with some of these M80 games of when they'll be able to play them. FMCL versus Citrus Nation is a huge game. It's actually a huge game. Likewise, if Green Fortnite can do anything against Students of the Game, it's maybe a big ask, but it'd certainly help. So a lot of interest and action still to happen out of FACEIT. Obviously, the Dallas Major is happening this weekend, which is where everyone's focus is going to be. But once we get past that, we're really getting to the crunch time in FACEIT, so it's super important for all these teams, especially in those matchup against the teams vying for the same spots as them. So stay tuned to the channel. I'll bring you more of these catch-ups every week to keep you informed. There's loads of live matches on the channel if you want to watch any of the more of the matches in detail. Catch them in full. Go check out some Merritt Winston if you think you have the stomach for it. And we'll also do a lot of them live on Twitch. Most of the live games do tend to be EMEA because of the time zones, but I do a lot of replay casts as well, so you can catch some of that live. You can go check that out on the Twitch. Follow and subscribe, all that good stuff. Likewise, subscribe to the channel if you want more of this FACEIT action, and obviously a lot of Dallas coverage coming this way as well. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate you joining me, and I'll see you next week.